Well, good morning. This is Tampa Home Talk. Thanks so much for joining us today. We will be here for an exciting 2 hours. We have a lot of fun lined up, actually, over these next couple of hours. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest. Very fun show for you lined up today. Leo, I mean, Leo, you're going to have a ton of fun with this because this is right up your alley with your background and your degrees. I'm your host, Katrina Madewell, joined by my counterparts.
Leo Kane with Barrel Engineering and Inspection.
And Adam Talley with Talley Insurance.
And our guest is Steve Fickett. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
And he is with Thornton Lab, and he is the president and also senior project manager. I have a feeling you wear a lot of hats at that company. Is that right?
Yes, it's a small company, but we do a lot of different businesses.
And
so.
It's really interesting. You were telling me before the show started, and the topic by the way, for the show today is what is in my water. So water test, when you need it, and actually how to pass your water test. But can you tell me a little bit about your company? You're with Thornton Lab, but you guys do so much more than just lab stuff, right?
Yes, foundation of our company was in the fertilizer industry. We still do a lot of fertilizer testing. We do a lot of international work. We work for companies in Africa and Europe and South America, and so that's a big part of our business. But then we do nutraceuticals, soil, water, industrial chemicals, and a lot of variety of matrix.
Now, Steve, didn't you tell me like your number one thing is you guys do a lot of soil testing, right? It's kind of your number one thing?
No, I wouldn't say it's number one. We do some soil testing. There are labs out there that, not so many in Florida, but there are labs that do soil testing. It's very important to the agricultural industry. A soil lab that's set up that does a suite of tests could do 200 or 300 samples per day. We're not set up to do it that way, but we do know how to do soil testing, and we do that for some clients.
So it's your staff is pretty. I was looking just a little bit on your site to figure out a little bit more about you before you got here, and your staff includes all type of people from experienced professional chemists to technicians to microbiologists. You have surveyors, samplers, and a whole host of people, and support staff, of course.
That's true. We have quite a variety, and actually quite a variety of nationalities too. We've had upwards of 9 different companies represented, countries represented in our company. So we're very fortunate to have some very talented people working with us for the diversity of the work we do.
And so, tell me, your company started in 1922, right?
Yes, correct.
And was this a family-owned, third-generation company as well?
Yes, it was a family-owned company by the Thornton family.
Mm-hmm.
And my business partner and I bought the company in 2006, and so we've run the company since then.
And so, when you guys started in 1922,
mm-hmm.
were you doing the same thing then that you are now, or I'm sure your business has changed a lot?
Yes, in the beginning, the lab was actually put together by the Thornton family. There were a couple of brothers involved, and the uncle of one of the original members he led the company for the most recent years until we bought the company. But prior to that, it was basically set up to satisfy the needs of the fertilizer industry. At the time, there wasn't a private laboratory that could do independent testing of the fertilizers, and so the Thornton Laboratories partnered with. There must have been at that time 17, 18 different fertilizer companies just in Florida. Now it's been reduced. We're down to about 2. And so,
wow, why do you think that is?
Well, the world's changing as far as fertilizer. Some of the fertilizer resources now are in the Middle East and Africa, and some of the bigger companies are producing finished fertilizers there too, as well as mining for the phosphate
so Steve,
rock.
You got to tell me this. What's the best soil to plant my basil in that will take off? Can you let me know what that is?
Oh. Well,
I always get these little little either specks on the backside or like these little white veiny looking things on the leaf. Leo, you're halfway a farmer.
The
You know what that
specs
is?
are going to be aphids.
What is that?
That's a bug.
Oh, well, I haven't seen those in a while, but I've seen them before.
Yeah,
bugs. We gotta get you an exterminator.
Oh, stop it.
He can tell you what kind of bug it is, but he can't fix
on the
it.
backside of the leaves, and those are actually insects.
What about on the top part when it starts getting that? Isn't that a fungus,
that
right? With the
silly
white
Leo
part?
up.
Yeah? With the white part on the top part of the leaf?
Yeah, fungus, and so that's nothing to do with soil.
Okay, but it's nothing to do with soil?
No.
So where did it come from? Is it the plant?
First, you need to have your soil tested. Find out what
Can you help
nutrients,
me with
what's
that?
there and what's lacking. Actually,
Where's the best place to
there's a
get
real
soil?
move afoot with soil amendments, soil conditioners. It's a big deal now. There's a lot of amino acids, different types of bacilli and so forth are being added because people realize that you have to have a good organic soil before your plant will actually begin to take up the nutrients.
Do you have any herbs and vegetables at your house?
Only my wife's.
Only your wife's? Well, she does, right?
She does.
So where do you buy the soil for your herbs?
She uses those earth boxes.
She does?
Oh, wow,
Okay.
those are nice.
So she's throwing all the composition in there?
Yeah,
Is that what it is? Okay.
yeah.
But don't you have to start with the foundation of soil?
Well, yeah,
Okay.
you can buy, appropriate amount to
I guess
fit in your earth box.
They probably would love the coffee grounds, right? For my coffee in the morning?
Doesn't hurt.
Cool.
Yeah, another thing you should do if you raise your own chickens and you have the eggshells, you can crush the eggshells up
Yes.
and put them in your high acid loving plants.
I'm in a deed restricted community. I'm not allowed to have chickens.
My granddaughter raises chickens.
She does?
Yes, it
So-
says chickens, eggs raised by Zoe
Aww.
with loving care. And she,
We actually had a chicken once. My son found these chickens in the woods by our house, and it was just I don't know if it was a pet that got away or what happened. So this chicken, it's
Feral chickens
Well,
roaming
my daughter-
around the greater
No,
Lutz area.
Yeah.
This chicken actually got really tame to the point to where, I'm not kidding you when I tell you my daughter, the one right there in the other room, she swam with this chicken in our pool.
Oh, my.
She would just pet this chicken and hang out with it. And anyway, we ended up giving the chicken
Tampa still cracks me up. I can have chickens in the urban core of Tampa, but you can't have them in the
I
backwoods
know.
of Hillsborough and Valrico.
We live in Valrico. Other direction.
Yeah.
so in San Antonio, you have to be careful because the hawks will come down and grab your
Yes,
chickens.
they will.
That happened.
Yeah, I'm probably closer to San Antonio than I am to
Yeah,
Valrico.
there was actually a movement. Someone was trying to do it, politician in Ybor, to release some hawks to help with the chicken population, since humans aren't allowed to take care of them. Take care of them in the way
Yeah.
that
I don't
with
see
the
any
mob movies.
problem with the Ybor chicken population. I love those little
I
creatures.
know, they're kind of cool seeing them all walking around in there. Anyway. All right, so we got started on this whole, what brought this whole show about?
Earth boxes.
Steve, in the earth boxes. We love to sidebar and just have fun on the show as well. But mortgage companies, whenever someone's getting a government loan, so FHA, VA, USDA type loan, they're going to check for two things in the water. So they're going to look for coliform and they're going to look for E. coli. And so Leo's, being that you do the inspections as well, I know this is not a normal part of your stuff, but you can probably chime in on some of the things I'm going to talk about. So with that being said, you guys also test water, right, for these things?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
And we do the sampling.
Oh, you do
Which is
samples too.
Sampling is very important to any of the analysis we do.
Thank you, because that's
Basic
exactly what I was thinking.
basic rule is the analysis is no better than the sample that's taken.
'Cause let's talk about that, because we have had several water tests fail, and sometimes I believe that is legitimately just the way it was taken.
Well, yes, the lab always gets blamed for that.
So, well, you can't blame the...
But I'll tell you, we have a procedure though. Usually when you're sampling a well, it's out in the backyard someplace. Sometimes the residents hardly know that it's there. It's usually covered in weeds sometimes where you have to take the sample. It's exposed to the elements, bugs, and everything else. So one of the things we do is initially, when we go to the spigot or the faucet at the well, is you open that up and blow it out as much as you can to get fresh water in.
So are you guys taking it from the outside, not from the inside?
No, it's a well for the VA.
VA, okay.
Okay, well, FHA also, but for the total E. coli bacteria, it's at the well, and also it could be a nitrite sample at the well. It's part of the USDA and the FHA.
All right.
requirements.
So you probably hear the music rolling in already, which means we're going to run out of time in this segment. And there's a lot of stuff to talk about with this. So we'll pick up when we resume after the next break. If you have any questions about some of the stuff we're talking about, or you know a lot about it and you want to chime in, feel free to call us. I'll have Pat give out the on-air number in a minute. But our off-air number where you can call or text is 813-377-2775. You can call or text us at 813-377-2775. If you've got some questions about your water and you want to know if they can come take a sample and kind of check your stuff out, or you have no idea what we're talking about, feel free to call or text. We'll send you the whole show for the podcast and the video in its entirety. 813-377-2775. We'll be back right after this break.
Well, good morning. Welcome back. You're listening to Tampa Home Talk. This is Leo Kane with Katrina Madewell, and I'm with Adam Talley, and I'm with Steve Fickett from Thornton Labs, Senior Project Manager or President. Haven't decided?
He's both. He does
Both.
a little bit of
Wears a lot of
a whole
hats.
lot of everything, I'm sure.
So let's talk a little bit about coliform and E. coli. I always hate when I get those test results back and it says TNTC.
Too numerous to count.
I know. It's a cool slogan.
What does that mean?
I think that would be awesome for a death metal band, too numerous to count. But I don't want to see it on my water test. Basically, they gave up. It's so pervasive, they've just given up counting.
What, you mean there's too much bacteria in
when you
there?
culture the sample, okay, for the test, if it's so overgrown that you can't realistically give a count for so many CFUs per gram or
And
What
a
is this?
CFU for us uninitiated.
colony forming units.
Yes.
If you're doing that particular
Again,
test.
everything he's talking about is going to be a great death metal band.
But not everybody, listening has a chemist degree. So we wanna-
Colony forming units, too numerous to count. Those are my next two albums.
So let's back up to what we were talking about right before the break. And so when you guys go to actually test the well, you're testing the potability of the water, essentially.
That sampling, I mentioned how you get fresh water in the line. Then we use
so talk about that,
then we
because-
sanitize the faucet because that could be dirty. So
I don't want you to run past that because you
What?
you said your sample is only as good as your source.
sample.
Like yeah,
your testing is only
Right.
as good as your sample.
Thank
right.
you for correcting me.
So many samples in my day watching them not bleeding the line out, and you get all this gunk that's basically on the spigot. And that goes into the sample jar, and that sample leaves. And I can tell you 100% of the time that's going to come up too numerous to count.
But talk about this. Like what's some of the common ways that people can fail their water test? Tell me what they're doing wrong, and then tell me how you guys do it right.
Well, number one, typically when you're doing it for an FHA or VA, it has to be a third-party sampler. The homeowner cannot sample it himself, or even So if they're doing it on their own, they should do what we're talking about right now. And also, we sanitize the faucet. We use the isopropyl alcohol, spray that on there.
70% or 90%?
I think we use tech grades, like over 90%.
Very nice.
So how are you doing that? You're finding the outside well, you're cleaning whatever's around it.
Then we also put on our plastic gloves, our sterile gloves, and also the bottle, and you don't take and you turn the water down so you get a nice drip flow, and then you take your sample, and your bottle has a seal on the cap, and you don't open that until you're ready to take the sample. Open it, you take your sample, minimum 100 milliliters, and you close it off, and you're done. And then you put it back in your little ice box or whatever you have there to keep it fresh and out of the Florida heat.
Now, what's your timeline like to sample it? How long does it take you guys to do it, and how long does it take to get it through the lab and get the results back?
It depends. I mean, sometimes we're going to Hernando County or other counties outside of Hillsborough County, so there's always a trip involved, that sort of thing. You have to get it back to the lab within 24 hours of sampling. We, of course, bring them back the same day, and they're set the same day.
Right, because you get different results, right, if they're not tested right away?
Well, it's required. That's part of the protocol for testing for the total E. coli bacteria. Has to be set within 24 hours. And then you have your results usually the second day. It has to run for at least a minimum 24 hours, up to 30 hours. And most of the tests for the VA and FHA are a simple basic pass present absent, I should say, present absent. It doesn't have to be those CFUs we just talked about.
It's a pass or fail because you're only looking for a couple things.
Yes, that's right. If we do a similar type of water test for, say, agricultural, for irrigation for a farm, they want to know what is the level of the contamination if there is total E. coli bacteria. So that's when we do the membrane filtration test, and that way we give them so many CFUs per 100 mils.
And CFUs are?
And
colony forming units. The name of my second album.
Right. So, but you, in some of the cases, you're allowed to have a little bit of total coliforms, but the E. coli, that's verboten. You don't want to have any. You want that to be less than 1.
What would cause that to be in the water, basically?
Well, we're really kind of surrounded by a lot of bacteria and things like that, and I was always concerned during the period when we had the recession, because there were a lot of homes out there that were sitting for a long time, and they weren't the water wasn't being used, the houses weren't occupied, and so was one of the first questions we always asked the realtor, how long's the house been vacant, because you really need to make sure that number one, the well is working, and that the water in the house has been thoroughly flushed out,
or
you're dealing with a high risk of failure right off the bat.
So it's like stagnant water.
Absolutely, stagnant water, and it's
someone has to live there. How long do you guys run the water, or how long do you suggest running the water before you guys even get there?
Well, if it's been sitting for quite a while, you need to make sure that bladder tank is, it's gone through its cycle, and you want to open up all the taps in the house, open up everything, bathrooms, kitchen, everything. Your outside faucets, all that, because it really needs to all be flushed out. Yeah.
And when you said bleeding the line, was that what you meant earlier, or is that something different?
That's my third album, but yes, bleeding the line.
Got it.
Well, I have a question for you, and this is probably good for some of our listeners out there. Let's say they have a house, okay? Maybe grandma passed away or something, so they have the house, haven't sold it yet. How often should they be running the water to make sure that they don't have that sort of issue come up?
Well, under normal occupancy of the house and use of the water, because you're showering, you're using the bathrooms and all these usually that's enough to keep the water fresh.
But if nobody's living there, how often should they go back and make sure they're running the water to make sure it's okay?
There, I would say at least once a week.
Okay. And just do the same thing you said, just kind of turn everything on, flush a toilet, make sure everything's good to go.
That would be best.
Okay.
Best.
Now, if you're letting a house sit vacant too long, you get a sulfur buildup and an iron buildup as well. There's nothing fancier for a homeowner to have a home inspector with them, and we turn the shower on and it comes out a bleeding red and smells like eggs.
Yes.
It's one of the reasons too why occupancy is such a big deal with the insurance. Is if no one's there to keep track of these things, bigger accidents tend to happen when nobody's there. So.
Well, you have to remember that water that you're getting in the well there, that's Mother Nature's water. So it's coming out of the ground from, most people have a well, don't even know how deep the well is.
Interesting.
And sometimes, and I usually recommend if you think your well is less than 100 feet, you might consider that you're getting surface water into your well.
Oh, wow.
How do they test that? Is there a well company can tell you how far down that is?
Well company would do that, yeah.
And so essentially I know there's a lot, I've seen all this stuff online on Amazon, that sort of stuff, of course, for government has to be a third party that's doing it. But what if somebody wanted to test their water themselves? How accurate do you think those are? Where they just test it?
Actually, most homeowners wouldn't have the capability of testing it themselves. However, in Hillsborough County, the county has a lab that can actually do a total E. coli bacteria very inexpensively, and I believe the facility is on the USF campus behind the Embassy Suites. They can only do total E. coli bacteria, but they will give you a little Whirl-Pack bag, and you can take the sample and take it back to them. Now, you don't get results as fast as you would from a commercial lab, but within a week or two, they would give results because they don't.
Is it the students testing it there, possibly?
I can't speak to that, but it could be.
Yeah, you got to learn somewhere.
But,
good spot.
You get what you pay for.
Hey,
So how much does a water test cost? Like if you're testing this for coliform and E. coli to make sure it's going to pass for a government loan, what does that run?
Well, our basic bacteria test, you're looking at probably about $19 a sample, something like that.
And that's for everything you're sampling your lab results?
No, no, because there's a trip charge usually involved and reporting. And so it could cost more, and we do charge for the trip, the time, the distance we have to travel.
Now, can someone bring it in to you? Or you
yeah. Okay. Other people do take the samples. We have other engineering companies and environmental companies that take samples for the clients and bring the samples to us.
There's a special form for that, and it's also a cool sounding name, called the chain of custody.
Yeah,
I'm not making this stuff up.
All right.
Do you guys do the chain of custody?
Not anymore.
Okay.
I think I'm the only one on staff that has the certifications to do chain of custody, and I don't. My time's better spent elsewhere than driving to Hernando County to take a $20 sample.
Well, it's not only in Hernando. You guys are in Hillsboro, right?
Well, Hillsboro. Well, yeah, our lab is in Tampa.
That's what I thought.
Tampa, yeah. Now the other thing you were talking about bacteria, but with an FHA, you have to do a nitrite at the well.
Yes.
And actually, they require a lead sample at the inside tap, and it has to be taken after the water's been still for at least 6 hours. So we usually recommend coordination with the homeowner and the realtors as far as coordinating us to have access to the house. And frankly, under some circumstances, because it can be very inconvenient, we try to we would accept the homeowner or take the sample and hold it for us to put in our preserve bottle.
Right. All right. Well, you're listening to Tampa Home Talk. When we come back after the break, I would love it very much if you could break down what the nitrate, lead, all that stuff means a little bit more, just so we have an idea what you're testing for. And then we'll talk about what happens if your water test fails. You're listening to Tampa Home Talk. We'll be back right after this break.
Welcome back to Tampa Home Talk. This is Adam Talley with Talley Insurance, joined by Katrina Madewell of Keller Williams and Leo Kane of Barrel Project Engineering and Inspections. And today we have Steve Fickett of Thornton Labs. And before we dive back in, we're going to touch on our 2-minute insurance tip of the week. And we were earlier talking about vacant homes. Now, when it comes to occupancy of your home, if it changes, you definitely need to tell your insurance agent. So if you're going from a primary occupancy to renting it out, there's a different type of policy involved. And then same if it's vacant. So most insurance carriers don't want to insure you if you're vacant. So we do have a special product for that, and it's mostly geared towards your vacant homes that maybe need to be sold or your flips, so your renovations. And those are, 1 month to 6 month policies.
And if you don't tell your insurance company that you moved out, then what?
Well, depending on what would happen, if you needed to file a claim, they could deny it based on...
Does your insurance usually go down if you have a tenant in there, but up if it's vacant? Is that accurate?
If it's vacant, it depends on how long it's vacant, but if it's vacant, it could be a completely different type of situation. As far as, an HO3 versus a DP3, which is that, rental property policy, it really depends on the home and what you want to insure inside of it, right? So if I do a DP3 for you and we only put, $3,000 worth of contents and it's at actual cash value, that's probably going to be a little bit less just because we're not insuring all the extra stuff. But it's that personal property that kind of drives up the rate on that because you're not there to protect it. So
yeah, and I think it's an easy thing to get overlooked, right? Like if you're busy and you're moving, you're just trying to figure out how to cover your mortgage payment if you have one. So it's the last thing people are thinking about.
Well, and people, sometimes they don't. Renting it out isn't necessarily their first choice, right? They put it on the market. They're like, I'll just keep the policy until it expires, put it on the market, and then it's 3 months later. They're like, well, let's just rent it because we need the money. And it's the last thing on their mind for sure.
So we were talking about the nitrites. Is that right? And then some of the things that FHA, VA look for when they do the water samples and the well test. What are you guys looking for? What are those? We're familiar with them. I've heard about them, but I don't really know what we're looking for.
Well, at one point they considered the nitrates and nitrites as a risk to infant children in the development of, I think, the heart. experienced on the medical side there, but
at
that
one
was why
point,
that's why they required it. And then of course the lead. Everyone's concerned about lead in their water. However, it was, I think it was about 1985 was when the EPA required that there can be no lead in our plumbing and a lot of other materials. But that is still sort of a remnant in a way, okay, because most of our homes now have PVC since then, but they still require that the lead be tested, okay. And there's still some, I've still found some issues with the lead. If you have old kitchen or bathroom fixtures and maybe some of the shut-off valves underneath the sink and so forth, some of those are so old that they might have had lead in them. Oh. And when lead is found, and there's a limit to how much they allow, it's kind of difficult because now you have to figure out where is the source of the lead. So you might have to call in a plumber to try to figure it out, or you work with the homeowner to see, inspect it yourself and see if you can determine where the lead may be coming from. Fortunately, it doesn't happen a lot as far as homeowners are concerned. It's not a major concern, but it does happen.
So I have a question for you, and I don't know if you do any testing for the city of Tampa or anything like that, but it seems like every now and then my water smells like chlorine, tastes like chlorine. What is that, and why do they do that, basically?
Well, I believe Tampa is using chloramine now, but they do change from time to time, and I never know for sure just when because they have reasons why they have to go from chlorine to chloramine. But they're putting that in, and I really shouldn't be speaking for the city of Tampa or Hillsborough County.
Generalities,
but,
if we're
they're
smelling
injecting that, at certain times, then they may want to do it at, in the middle of the night or something like that. I don't know what their timeline is for doing it. So you could get a smell. You could smell that chlorine.
The chlorine's better than E. coli, Adam.
It is definitely better than E. coli. Yes. I am not sitting here to argue that. I just, it's funny. You turn on the faucet and all of a sudden you're like, yep, they did something.
And you don't know where, from what point it's being injected. You may be at the near point of injection, or seeing, like, if you live in the Channelside district, you might be closer to the water treatment.
That's probably what's going on.
Than if you're at the end of the line.
You're getting flushed early.
Yeah.
This is going on, Adam. We're speculating about it.
I had an interesting, you asked me about stories. That was an interesting, one of our professional baseball players' home, which was very, very expensive home. He was having problems in his family walk-in shower, a huge room there, with his skin was being affected, and, it was irritating them and so forth. Long story short, it turned out that they had he had a water treatment system on his house. However, they had a separate line that went only to that shower area because of the demand of the water. And that line did not have the water treatment on it. And they were getting high chlorine levels, and,
bothering his
and
skin.
it was irritating them. And we couldn't that was what
finally figured
happened.
It out. But
yeah, it was a separate water line. Didn't even know that.
Wow. So what's your process, without getting too technical, how you test the water? Like, once they take the sample, we talked about that.
I love technical.
Well, you can be technical, but explain it so that the rest of the person listening
Leo
can understand where you're going. How do you test it when it gets to the lab?
Well, there are required methods for testing, and lead typically would be tested by maybe ICP,
which is
inductively coupled plasma instrument.
You can jump in on the terms, Leo.
And then,
okay. Only if they're metal bands.
I just want to make sure we're explaining so that these technical terms that I have no idea what they mean. I'm sure the person listening is like, what's that?
But there are required methods that you have to use for testing.
Mm-hmm. And so how long does it take? Is it a pretty quick process on your end, or does it have to wait for a while?
Well, the bacteria is a time test. That's not a problem. The nitrite, depending on the method that you're using, the nitrite test would be done in an unpreserved sample and needs to be set within 48 hours. And then your nitrate, that's the NO3, it would be in a preserved sample, so you have more days to test that sample.
So I want to a lot of this whole topic came up because of a recent situation that we had with a property that we sold, and we'll talk about this, and I'll lead into it. But basically, well, let me tell the story now. What happened was the water test actually failed. So, and you and I talked about this a little bit before you came on the show. The homeowner just very proactively hired a plumber to come out and bring in a water system, and it still kept failing. Like 4 different times it failed. And I don't know what was going on there, but I don't think they were flushing or chlorinating the well properly. And I'm just curious, if the water test fails, how do you correct it?
Now, did it fail that just, we're talking total E. coli bacteria?
Yep.
Nothing else?
Coliform and E. coli, yep.
Well, we usually recommend that you have a well driller. Usually they're the ones that do it, to come back and shock your whole system. You usually they recommend sometimes 3 gallons of bleach directly down the wellhead. We found usually 1 or 2 gallons is enough, but it's something they usually have to do.
And then they flush it out.
A lot of wells
right?
are different. Yes, you have to uncap your well. You have to pour the bleach in. You have to recap it. You turn the pump, make sure the system is on. You open up all of your spigots, faucets in the house and outside until you smell the chlorine, and then you shut everything down and you let it sit for a minimum of 6 hours. I think maybe 4 hours or so. But anyway, I recommend overnight. You let it sit overnight. Yeah, it's an inconvenience to the if you're living there.
So, because they can't touch the water.
You shouldn't, but 4 or 6 hours, and then you open up your faucets and everything and flush that out. When that smell dissipates, you should be good. And it's not just people don't understand sometimes. It's not just putting the chlorine in the water. It's contact time with the chlorine to kill the bacteria.
So that's
why you have to open up all the taps, because you don't want any dead lines where the chlorine water did not go.
So it sits for a while, and then you flush everything out everywhere, right?
Yes. Okay. This is a big issue for us on developments where contractors have to have their new plumbing lines put in when they're doing new construction, and so you have to do 2 consecutive days of testing and no failures before that water is available to the public.
You're awful quiet on this topic, and I'm not sure why. Are you tired?
No, I'm just listening. I mean, I'm very familiar with this whole...
I know. That's why I'm so surprised that you're so quiet.
He's telling it well. I mean, there's ways to kill well when you oversalt it. There's ways to shock wells by pouring the bleach in.
Wait, what did you say? Kill the well if you oversalt it?
Yeah, you put salt in the well, which stops the water flow, and that's how you can then start drilling or doing repair to the well. You have to kill the well.
Adam, don't even act like you're not learning stuff, too.
I'm learning. So I'm over here trying to research all these things that they're saying, I mean, it's... they didn't teach me this in economics in college. It's a little different coursework there.
It's just neat to think that, I mean, most ground level wells are going to be about 60 feet, so you're going to get some surface water contamination in there. If you're in an agricultural area, you're worrying about nitrates and phosphates getting into the drinking water. And there's big concern. So I guess my question back to you, Katrina, would be: I know if you're near city water or near city septic, they're going to try and force you to connect. But does having a well do anything with property values up or down?
I mean, for irrigation, it's good. It's good for irrigation. I think most people prefer not to have a well in septic. Like, generally speaking, they'd prefer to be connected. But if you have a well, why would you take it out? You can use it for irrigation.
At no cost.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know my daughter in San Antonio has an agricultural well, which is about 450 feet deep.
Wow.
Holy smokes.
It's big, and you have unlimited supply of water.
Does she do a farm?
16 acres about. So.
What does she
have
there?
But it's not a farm, it's just a home.
Okay.
Yeah.
She has her own little mini farm with animals.
Yeah, couple of horses and chickens.
See, the neat thing about the different wells is just imagine the ground levels. Like we all know about the dinosaurs, and that they're at a certain level in the ground, and then above that you've got the seashells where we used to be underwater and stuff. Well, underneath the water, underneath the ground, you have different rivers at different heights, and these wells tap into those different rivers. And once you get to around 1,200 feet, you actually have to start to treat the water for the sulfur. Because the further down you go, the stankier the water gets.
Yeah. That's the problem in Pinellas County, because it's saltwater intrusion.
Is that the technical term?
Stanky.
Stanky.
I have to make sure it's not one of the 7 words I'm not allowed to say on the radio.
That totally caught me off guard. I'm just
So, I mean, we have that. Yeah, on the West Coast, if your well is too deep, you get saltwater intrusion, and We should talk about it after the break because 813-377-2775.
It's our off-air number. You can call or text that. You got a question. 813.
Text Stanky to 813-377-2775.
And we'll come out and test your water well.
All right. This is Tampa Home Talk. I'm your host, Katrina Madewell. Stick around. We'll be back right after this break.
Oh, we were talking about basically saltwater intrusion into wells on the west coast by the water. That's where we left off.
Interesting.
Which is a serious concern because now you're introducing salt, which is used to kill wells, and you get salty water, which if you drink too much salt water, you dehydrate and die. So. Well,
we talked about the desalinization. Remember?
Yeah. Now I do have a question for you. You know, now that we're talking about intrusion and all this other stuff. Do you do any of the testing? Like, what if, like on these golf courses that they're trying to build new communities on, do you do that type of testing as well? And what are they looking for there?
You mean the water on the golf courses?
Not necessarily the water. I think they do soil as well for those type of things. I don't know if that's in your expertise.
Not so much. Not so much. A lot of the golf courses, have professional people that know how to fertilize the.
Oh no, I was more talking about when
they're talking about the phase 1, phase 2.
Yeah, like if they're taking out, like if they're like say the golf course is no longer, but they're trying to build on it.
Oh, I see.
So they have to do all that testing.
No, not too much.
Okay.
Who is a good customer for you? So for the person listening, who's a great connection for you, Steve?
Well, one of the things that keeps us really busy as far as this water sampling and testing are the contractors on the new buildings. All the new buildings, no matter where you are, if you're connecting to the water system, you have to have that water tested, and they're required to have 2 consecutive days of non-failures. Now,
and if they do,
and that's kind of a minimum. That's kind of a minimum requirement of them. But it is because if you had a kindergarten or something like that, and you had well watered, you might have to do as many as 20 samples, but in a 30-day period, none of which can fail in the last 4 samples.
There's not really any kindergartens that have
it's an exceptional type of issue, but the contractors have to have 2 consecutive days of non-failures.
And so this is anytime they bring in new lines, or are we still talking about well and septic?
These are new lines for new construction.
Okay. So brand new lines.
Yeah, or
if you had a break, if you had the city or the whatever county, if there was a break in the line, something like that, and then they repaired it.
We talked about this last week.
They'd have to test.
A lot of those pipes are 100+ years old. So.
And her husband gets to walk through them.
Yeah, he has. He has. They're huge. I mean, some of them we can totally stand up.
Still hasn't found my cell phone yet, though, right?
No, I didn't. If you would have called me, honestly, like when it happened, I probably could have hooked you up. But the fact that you did it and you're asking about like 3 months later.
Well, how am I going to call you?
What do you mean? How are you going to call me?
With my phone in the water.
You weren't with anybody else that had a cell phone? You were by yourself?
I don't know your number off the top of my head.
Well, you should.
I would have texted 813-377-2775 and said help.
It does ping to my cell phone. So I might have seen it. No closing thoughts here or arguments.
About him dropping his cell phone and being found.
No, the water.
No. I mean, it's just neat. Anytime you have a break, anytime you have a new connection or a hot tap, they just want to make sure that the pipe is clean going into it. That's why a lot of places have backflow preventers for the potable water lines to prevent water from backflowing into the system if it happens to have been contaminated. So I mean, there's a lot of safety precautions. It's all about safety. And this is one of the reasons why I just try not to drink bottled water at all. I mean, I always drink tap water when it's available for that reason, because I know it's clean.
So you think your tap water is cleaner than your bottled water, yeah? What you're saying?
Well, I mean, like Sam's Club got in trouble. I believe it was Sam's Club. Don't quote me on the who. There was some big bottled realtor that got in trouble for basically tapping municipal water and putting it in bottles.
What?
This was about 15 years ago.
Okay.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I can't remember who it was either, but.
Well, what do you think a lot of your bottled water comes from?
It comes from a tap.
It comes from a well somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Yeah, I mean, like, I always like being knowledgeable. Like, I pick up a bottle. We have 3 of some level of bottle here. I'll pick up the bottle and I'll look at the treatment on the side of the bottle.
Let's see. Where's it
I see a choking hazard.
No, it's choking hazard. It tells you if it's
Crystal Springs, Pasco County.
Yeah, it's going to tell you if it's
That's the source.
if it's reverse osmosis, if it's ozonated. I mean, there's good.
I do not see that.
They tell you usually on the bottles, and now since we're on the air live, I'll have to find it afterwards. But they always tell you how the water is treated, and you can learn a lot about where it's coming from. To
No
that
chance it's untreated if it's from a spring, or everything
No,
has
they
to be
usually
treated.
They have to
usually
treat it.
Yeah.
Ah, I see.
They don't just dip it in the spring and scoop it up.
You mean I can't go to Crystal River and just open my mouth and dive right in?
Good. Nothing
You
can stop
could
it.
something.
With the manatee.
Yeah.
Well, we've had a lot of fun having you here, Steve. I hope you had a
Thank
great
you.
time with us this morning.
Very interesting.
They do all sorts of stuff. Just recap for the person listening exactly what you guys do. You do so much more than the water and well test. What other things do you guys do?
Well,
A lot
of
of
course,
soil, right?
Well, some soils, but the nutraceuticals, hand creams, and a lot of companies are. You'd be surprised how many companies we have in the Tampa Bay area that are making nutraceuticals, various creams and things like that, cosmetics, and other types of organic fertilizers and that sort of thing.
What are you guys testing the creams for?
We're testing for bacteria.
Oh,
Make
okay.
sure there's no bacteria. Testing for, again, total E. coli bacteria and
Is that an
those
ongoing
are
or an initial?
USP, what they call USP test limits, and for some metals too and things like that. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it's really neat, like on the water treatment side, when they show up with their little whole bucket kit, because they've got to take like 10 to 15 samples to do all these tests, because certain water vials only get used once. So it's quite detailed to see these third-party companies come into a water treatment plant to do their every other day, quarterly, and monthly tests.
Yeah, that's something we didn't really touch on too much. If you have rental properties, you have apartment complexes and so forth, and the water is supplied by a well, you have to have that water tested. Oftentimes it's quarterly, and then sometimes, like maybe every 3 years, you have to do a nitrate test, and maybe lead in some occasions. But any rental property, like if a duplex, triplex, and so forth, you have to have your water tested. You can get a relief from that quarterly testing if you have so much time with no failures, something like that. You can request, maybe every 6 months or once a year, something like that. And
Very
then this includes churches, because it has a lot to do with the number of people that use that water.
Right.
So you have a lot of churches that are on a well. Some of the rural churches
So
have to test this.
just to wrap it up, what is the cost, to do the well testing and the water testing?
Well, it depends on the number of samples you have to take and so forth. But I would say in general, you're looking between $100 and $150.
Is that for both or each?
I'm just thinking about trip charge and
Okay.
a single bacteria.
But you could do
something like
both tests, the well and the water test when you're there. About that? Yeah?
that. Yeah, well, water from the well.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right, we have had
Yeah.
Steve Fickett. We've had a lot of fun with you from Thornton Lab. He's the president over there. Company's been around since 1922. I think we've all learned a little bit this hour.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for
It's been
joining
fun.
us. Had so much fun. We'll be back for the next hour before you blink. So don't turn your dial. Stick around. We'll be back in just a minute. You're listening to Tampa Home Talk, 813-377-2775. Remember, love where you live. We'll fix it. We're out.